I'm here to help you, bird. I'm not here to hurt you.
Oh my gosh.
Go, fucker. Stop. Stop. I don't want to break your wing. Stop. Get ready. Let's see if he figures it out. Did he fly?
He didn't fly, he's running.
No, okay. Hey YouTube, it's Ryan here again. Basically doing another update video to kind of give you a status on all of the projects that I've got going on here at AllMine Ranch. As you know, this is a build your lifestyle type channel where by building out my lifestyle, I hope to help you figure out things you can do in your life to live more in line with the way you want to live. One of the big things is when I bought this property, it was 13 acres in size, and I put a sizable down payment on it, and the sellers are carrying a note. Well, as I mentioned in last week's video, the property across the street became available, and when I found that out, I put in an offer, and that's their contract now scheduled to close July 2nd. I think I also mentioned last week that I've decided to go 100% off-grid. I've got cisterns and rain catchment for water here. I've got a brand new septic system. There's no sewer connections out here in this part of Cochise County, Arizona. And I've decided to go 100% off-grid using solar arrays for my power situation. But once I made that decision, it gave rise to lots of challenges or complexities, because it's not just this physical house that I'm in right now. I'm going to be building a big garage workshop out back, and I've also got a tiny house that is hardwired right now to AC, what I'll call shore power, and that's what I live in Dallas. I'll be bringing that tiny house out here to Arizona. I've got a parking spot, which I've shown you. I've leveled a pad and put down some gravel, and I think I'm going to be bringing out the tiny house in July. But the challenge is I've got to figure out how to create enough solar power with AC output, alternating current, that I can feed that tiny house, and once I eventually move back into this structure, to not have that power system out there just sitting idle and going to waste, only being used when I have a visitor or a guest or something like that that might stay in that tiny house. It's also only 6 feet away from what will be my eventual garage workshop. So with all that said, I've got to find a way to do solar power in sufficient quantity but limit my initial investment, because I don't have endless buckets of cash to invest into it, and do it in a way that I can reuse that system on the garage, where I will eventually have a need for 240 volts for certain key things like a table saw, because I like to do woodworking, and some of the power tools in woodworking like planers and jointers and things like that sometimes require 240 volt power, whereas most household power is only 120 volt AC. So I've come to some decisions. So let me just dive into some of the components and how I'm going to do my solar system and my power system. But in a future video over the next couple weeks, I think I'm going to do a video 100% exclusively on what my plans are for solar. One, to share that with you, but secondly, to get feedback from you guys for things and complexities or considerations that maybe I haven't thought of yet. And so let's dive into each of the components that's going to make up this solar system. Okay, first things first with solar. As I discovered when I was doing the solar system for Margo, my cargo trailer that I'm sort of living on here on this property right now, and that's actually providing power to this house right now through extension cords, is you have to make a decision about 12 volt, 24 volt, or 48 volt. And in this video, I'm not going to go into details on the implications or considerations of all of those, but 12 is most common, 24 is less common, and 48 volt is even less common still. One of the main advantages of 48 volt, though, is you can save a lot of money on your wiring, because the diameter and overall amount of copper in your wiring can be much smaller, and copper is very expensive, so you can save money by going with 48 volts. And that's what I've decided to do. I'm going to do a 48 volt system, and I'm going with essentially 4 100 amp hour batteries. They would be 100 amp hour if they were being configured in a 12 volt system, but because it's 48 volts by stringing 4 batteries together, basically if you take 12 volt batteries and string them together, you then are basically adding up your voltage, right? So 4 12 volts will get me 48 volt system. And so I think at the end of the day, I'll have 100 amp hours of capacity, but at 48 volts, which is sort of the equivalent of 400 amp hours at 12 volts. Hopefully that math isn't throwing you off too much, but I've decided to do that. So I've actually ordered 4 batteries for a company called SOK, because a guy named Will Prowse, if you're looking into solar, look up Will Prowse on YouTube, young guy who knows pretty much everything you could know about solar. He highly recommends those batteries. They're very well built and they're about half the price of Battleborn. So I've got 4 of those batteries on order, which should be here in about 3 weeks. I've also ordered and I have now a 48 volt all-in-one MPP charge controller / inverter. So in my cargo trailer, I've got an all-in-one unit and I really like it. It works great. It is a little bit loud because the inverter is almost always on and it's got fans that are blowing. But I like the convenience of having both your charge controller and your inverter all in one box. It just keeps everything really simple. So I bought a 24 volt for the cargo trailer. And because I've liked it so much, I've decided to get almost the exact same thing from the same manufacturer, which is MPP, which is a Chinese company, but in a 48 volt configuration. And I'll show you some images of that guy. So that's already arrived. And it's the nice thing about it, well, there's 2 things. One is there's 2 spots for the PV inputs on it instead of just 1, which is really cool. And as I said, it's got a 6,000 watt, I think I said it, if I didn't, it's got a 6,000 watt AC inverter built into it, which is quite a lot. So the plan is, out in my container that's going to be the start of my workshop, I'm going to build a little 4 by 8 foot utility room out there that is secure, and put the batteries, the inverter, and all the other components that go with that out there, because that structure is only a few feet away from the tiny house. I've also bought 15 240 watt solar panels from SanTan Solar out of Gilbert, somewhere around Phoenix, somewhere in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm actually my girlfriend and I are going to drive up there this week and pick up those panels. They're big. They're about 5.5 feet long and 3 feet wide. And I've got 15 of them. So those take up some space. But if you do the math, 15 times the 240 volt, I don't know, that puts you somewhere in the 3,500 kilowatt range for potential power input. So I'm going to go outside and I'm going to show you where I'm going to put all of these panels in just a moment. But I just wanted to share that I've got a fairly sizable solar panel array that's going to be combined into an 8-way combiner box that will then feed to this MPP all-in-one charge controller inverter that will then, connect to my 400 amp hours of batteries, and the output on that inverter will be connected directly, like hardwired, to the panel that's in my tiny house. I've decided to order a mini split air conditioner for the tiny house that'll draw less power than the 2 window units that I'm using right now in Dallas. It's not ideal, but I think between a generator and all that solar, if we have crazy hot days here in Bisbee where I just need to run the AC nonstop, but it's a little bit cloudy, so I'm not getting full solar, I can supplement with the generator. Then I can basically use that one system that'll be located in the garage to feed both the garage and the tiny house itself. And then I will build a whole nother system for the structure that I'm in right now. So hopefully all that makes sense. One of the other systems I want to talk about is the water system. I've been racking my brain on what I'm going to do for water when the tiny house gets here, because the distance from where the tiny house is to where my cisterns are is considerable, and I don't have any pumps. When I bought this property, the previous owners had purchased 2 really nice 2,500 gallon cisterns, and there's 2 of them out back. So I've got 5,000 gallons of capacity. but there's no pumps, there's no power, there's no plumbing into this structure that I'm in. And certainly there's no plumbing or way to get that water out to where my tiny house will be. So on Craigslist, I found a 350-gallon water tote. That's one of those sort of translucent plastic square water containers that's inside sort of a metal cage. So what I've decided to do is pick up one of those from a place up in Tucson. It's only like $150, which is pretty cheap for 350 gallons of capacity. Now, because they're translucent, they will allow sun into the container, which has the potential to grow algae. So I'm going to either paint it black or a dark color and or build like a plywood box for it. And it will live on the shaded side of the storage container I have outside. And so that will, inhibit any kind of algae growth. The benefit of using a temporary 350-gallon container is I can buy a transfer pump for about $70 from Harbor Freight, run some hoses, and basically borrow 350 gallons at a time from my big cisterns, the 5,000 gallon capacity cisterns, and just move it out closer to the tiny house as needed, and then draw from that tote using a little 12-volt household or RV type water pump to feed into a garden hose that feeds my tiny house. And that will also give me a good way to gauge how much water I'm actually using. When I've got a 350-gallon tank, I can see at a glance how much water I'm drawing, how many weeks it takes to go through that 350 gallons. I'll have to take short showers and not flush the toilet as often as some people might. But I think I can get 2 or 3 weeks at a time out of 350 gallons. I don't use very much water at all. I try to reuse my gray water to water the landscape and things like that. So hopefully that'll work out. And then once my garage is built out, let's say a year from now, and I've got that workshop and all the construction is sort of done, I think I'm going to buy another 2,500 gallon cistern identical to the ones I already have and put it out there by the tiny house. And then the roofs from the garage and the tiny house will be coming together. Then I can have gutters and a downspout that feeds that 2,500 gallon cistern. And then that way I will have essentially 7,500 gallons. So anytime you're using rain catchment systems and you live in an area where you don't get rain for a long period of time, you need to not let that first 100 gallons or whatever number you feel is right for you. You've got to divert that away from the cisterns, because think about it. You've got critters like birds that poop up on your roof, insects that die, flies, dirt, dust, you name it, up on the roof. And when you get that first rain of the season, especially here in Arizona where we get monsoons, you could get a sudden deluge that loosens all that, moves it into the gutter, and then from the gutter it would want to go directly into your cisterns. Now, if you're filtering your water, your drinking water, you're going to filter all that out. But in general, you don't want all that kind of stuff in your water supply in the first place. There's no point to it, and it can make your tanks kind of nasty. So we haven't had a rain here for a while. We're probably a month away from full-on monsoon season, and I don't have a first flush diverter system that takes care of that for you. And it basically is a tube that all that water fills up, and it's not until it totally fills up that a valve closes and allows water to pass directly into the cisterns. So whatever volume you make that tube is the amount of rain that gets diverted away from the cisterns at first rain. I'm going to need a fairly sizable system like that, and I don't have it yet. So what I did this week, I went up on the roof of this structure. I put a ladder up against the side of the building. I started filling a 5-gallon bucket. I carried the 5-gallon buckets up on the roof, and I started dumping the buckets onto the roof and sweeping and dumping and sweeping, and then pouring water into the rain gutter itself that was full of dirt and debris and a bird's nest. And before I did all this, of course, I took the tube, the downspout that comes from the gutters, into the cistern. I took it out of the cistern and let it run out onto the land. And I dumped probably 20 to 25 gallons through that system. And I took a broom and I really swept out the gutter really good because it was full of just dust. That's just how it goes here in the Arizona desert. You get a lot of dust. So basically I've done a seasonal first flush manually, I'm still going to get a first flush diverter that's built in, because you want to do this with every major rain, not just once a year. But I feel better now, having basically purged the system of the majority of debris that I don't want in my cisterns. So as you can tell, talking about this first flush diverter and going up on the roof and getting a tote for the tiny house, the water system in general for this entire property is pretty important, and it's on my mind. And so I'm at the point where I'm going to need to start purchasing, transfer pumps and hoses and first flush diverters. I've also got to rig up something for the cistern overflow, because if I'm back in Dallas and we get a major monsoon here and I'm not on the property and the cisterns fill up, which could happen because they've still got 3,000 gallons of water in the tanks right now, it will only take another 2,000 gallons of rain, which may sound like a lot, but that's basically less than 3 inches of rain. If we get a single storm that dumps almost 3 inches of rain, which is absolutely possible during a monsoon here in Arizona, that could fill up the rest of the cisterns, and then the overflow would not be... then the overflow could potentially wear a hole in the ground, because, I mean, think about it. If you've got a cistern that's 6 feet off the ground and it's pumping out, a high volume of water during a deluge while the ground is already saturated from a deluge, whatever area is underneath the cistern, under that overflow pipe, is going to wear a hole in it. And if I'm not here to manage that, that's a problem. So I'm trying to think through, what I'm going to do for the cistern overflow system, and for the flushing it, and purification, and how to have water out at the tiny house. Wow, it's crazy bright out here. But here's the back side of my house with the 2 cisterns. So 2,500 gallons each. There's a rain gutter up here that goes into that downspout. Let's go around here. And here's the overflow pipe. So if we were to get a serious storm without me being here, basically this cistern would start to fill up. It's already right here at the mid-level full of water. There's a pipe down here that brings it over to fill in this one. So they'll fill simultaneously, but then as soon as we hit capacity, this is just going to dump out. This is just a flat valve right here. See? That's going to dump out right here onto the ground. So I think what I'm going to do is take some steel panels and basically just make a little bridge of steel panels, roofing material, from these cinder blocks out here onto the land, and weight them down with some cinder blocks so when the wind hits them, they won't just fly away. As you can see, my little area here, this is George the Ocotillo. He is very green and fuzzy. This guy's very green. I've been watering all these guys. I've even put some water out here on my mesquite, oh, sorry about the wind, on this little mesquite bush. We'll see if he greens up a little bit. This guy is starting to get some leaves finally, so he's greening up. I've tried to reinforce this little embankment right here, and it created a little berm and basin around this ocotillo and creosote bush. He's starting to get a few leaves. Well, he was down here, not super green, but I got a few up here. So he's doing better than he was. So he's enjoying the water, and I've started to water all these ocotillos out here, so hopefully they'll show some signs of life soon. Now let me kind of show you what I have in mind. We're going to walk to the back of the property where I've got my container, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with the solar panels. This whole area in here, from the container out to these cinder blocks right here, is going to be a huge, 2-car garage, 3-car garage and workshop, right? And I'm going to have garage doors on both sides, so I can just drive right through the garage, exit out this back side, and then I've cut another driveway. I've shown this in previous videos, but I've cut another driveway to exit here to the street. I've got a berm right now that was basically excess dirt that is going to prevent rain flow. When it rains hard here, the water comes down the land in this direction, generally from north here down to the south. So as you can see, it slopes downhill all the way to Mexico there. So this area in here is all open. So I'm essentially going to take my 15 solar panels and do them in clusters of 5. In the center here, well, I'll have 5 big panels. They're going to face due south behind me. These on the right, I'll have 5. I'm going to tilt those a little bit to the southeast to catch more of the morning sun. And then here on the left side, I'm going to take another cluster of 5 and tilt them a little bit towards the southwest direction so they get a little more of the late afternoon sun. So I'll have 15 panels all along this embankment, which I'm going to reinforce, by the way, with rock and build it up a little taller and stronger. That'll provide some wind deflection during monsoons and keep the rain, you know, from eroding those berms. This is the tiny house parking spot. My future big cistern will be between these 2 cinder blocks. And this container is where I'm going to build my solar, basically my utility closet. So right here on this wall, I'm going to frame this in over the next couple of weeks and just basically bring it out 4 feet. It's across 8 feet and then 4. So this is going to basically be a utility wind. Try to get out of the wind a little bit. This is basically going to be a secure utility closet that I'm going to reinforce so no one can break in, because these, you know, the panel or the charge controller and the batteries and all that will be in here against this wall, and I don't want anyone to steal it if I'm not here on the land. So that's the plan. I'm going to connect the solar panels out here to this. I'm going to put the water tote right in here somewhere and just run a hose to the cisterns with pumps. Now in this area at the south end of the container, this is exposed to the sunlight, and I can put probably 6, maybe even 9 panels right here. So this will be an expansion area. Once I've built out the garage, if I need more power and more wattage, I can add 6 more panels. And because I'm buying a junction box that will take 8 different series of panels, I can easily just combine in more solar power. And then I also have this little area right here behind this wood pile where I can just clear a couple of bushes right here, this little triangle, and put a whole nother solar array right in this area, and that will face this direction, which is basically due south. And so I could probably add another 15 to 20 panels in here in the future if I need to, just by clearing this out a little bit. So that is the plan. Hopefully it'll all come together smoothly. So just designing any kind of system, both the power and the water, where you have multiple structures on a property and you know, construction going on, and you're going to be living in one structure and then later moving into another structure. All of that just creates complexities and things that require planning and, you know, forethought and foresight so that you do it, you know, efficiently with spending the least amount of money as possible, trying to balance, you know, cost versus convenience. Okay, 2 other items of note is when I bought this property, the previous owners had invested a pretty substantial amount of money into spray foam insulation. And they had bought that about a year ago, and it was coming up on its expiration date. And the structure, this house that I'm in right now, doesn't have electrical or plumbing or lighting or anything. It's just these, you know, basically bare walls and subflooring. So I was not at the stage where I could spray the insulation and use it up before it goes bad. So I decided to sell it. So I went on Craigslist and I listed the foam, and I really only had one person over a week interested in the foam, and he had educated himself about it and had done a bunch of research and was asking, you know, good questions, smart questions about, you know, how the foam was stored and how old it was and the temperature at which it was stored and things like that. He essentially made me a kind of a low offer for the foam. I think, you know, Brian and Laura, the previous owners, had paid roughly $3,500 with the shipping and all that for 6 spray foam kits. I ended up selling it for $2,200, which I thought was a decent price and really the only offer that I was going to get. So sorry, you know, Brian and Laura, that I discounted your foam so much. Someone ate $1,500. I guess that was me, ate $1,500. But I figure $2,200 in hand is better than $3,700 worth of expired foam that I'm not even sure I'm going to use. So I'm taking that $2,200 and basically that's what I'm using to buy my 6,000 watt all-in-one charge controller inverter and a couple of the batteries. So that's good news that I got that sold. The other thing is my girlfriend just came for a visit and I decided that I wanted to try to sleep in this structure instead of out in Margot, the cargo trailer. So I'll show you some pictures here. I actually took all of the OSB subflooring that was left over, 21 panels, and I put it up over the steel walls, which are uninsulated, because in the afternoon when the Arizona sun hits the metal walls, the inside temperature of these walls gets to about 110 degrees. But just by taking an OSB sheet and leaning it up and letting the OSB be some insulation, it's bringing down the temperature by a good 10 to 15 degrees. So I've basically covered this whole wall. I don't know if you can see all the way down here. This whole side of the house now has OSB on it, and my little office corner here has OSB. So that's made it a lot more enjoyable and a lot more comfortable to be here inside. I also wanted to try sleeping in here, so I created a little corner and brought in 2 mattresses, and now I've got a sleeping area here inside this house. So as of right now, I'm working during the day on my day job inside this house. I'm now sleeping in it, and I also walled off a little curtained area for an inside bathroom using the camping toilet that had been out in my cargo trailer. So essentially, I'm now just using the cargo trailer for 2 things: for the kitchen, that I'm not going to bring that inside here, and for power, because I've got 10 solar panels on the roof of the cargo trailer. I've also got that all-in-one inverter charge controller with AC power that comes out. So I'm running 2 extension cords into this house, and that's what I'm using to power lights, laptop, fan, and any power tools that I may need to run during the day. So that's actually working out pretty well. So I guess you could say I've started to transition while I'm here on this land to living inside the house instead of actually living in Margot, the cargo trailer.